before I go any further, well, as I go further, rather, I want to just give you a basic rundown, a very basic introduction to a brief history of the Middle East, starting with Abraham. Now, I got some dates here, but I will say this. If you research it, you're going to find out it's going to be very difficult to get a precise date for everything. There will be some conflicting dates depending on what sources you use. And I looked at several sources, and hardly any of them could ever agree on a specific date. They were basically the same, but just kind of keep that in mind. Now, starting in Genesis chapter 12, God called Abraham. He said, get thee out of the land of thy fathers and go to a place I'm going to show you. He said, in you all nations will be blessed. Okay. Now, from Abraham's call to the Exodus was about 430 years, according to Galatians 3:17. Now, God started this covenant with Abraham, as I said, in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1-4. He reaffirmed it in Genesis chapter 15, 13-16. And it's in that same passage in verse 18, God tells Abraham that his seed, which is Christ, he will have that land. It's going to go from the river Euphrates all the way over to the Nile River. Now, as far as occupation of this land, the covenant was later transferred in Genesis 26, 2-4 to Isaac. And then from there, you go to Genesis chapter 35, 9-12, and it was transferred to Jacob. Now, that brings us to the children of Israel at the close of Genesis, in Genesis 50:25, when Joseph is addressing the descendants of Jacob. And it actually is the first time we see the children of Israel mentioned as a phrase in the Bible. And they're coming up out of Egyptian bondage. And then they have the judges are established in Exodus chapter, I believe that's 18. And that starts a new phase in the Hebrew occupation of the land. And that lasts, according to Acts 13:20, it says about 450 years. I did some research on that map that I think it's closer to 430, but it's still about that 450 years. So we've come from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to the Exodus under the judges. And then starting in 1 Samuel chapter 9, we have the rise of the kingdom of Israel. It would later get divided around 1 Kings chapter 12 into a divided kingdom between north and south. And then what would happen, the next thing we find going on in Israel is the Assyrian empire would come to power and take occupation starting in about 721 BC. Okay. Now, after that, Babylon would actually rise, and you can read about that in the book of Daniel, and that takes place in the year 598 BC. That's when their occupation started. By the time Queen Esther comes into play, that's when she rises to power in the Persian Empire, and they have occupation over the land of Israel starting in 539. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, they kind of lay out prophetically the future role of Greece as the Grecian Empire comes to power. And then finally, Rome in about 63 BC, when they come to power, they have occupation. So I laid that out there to show you that there's never been a Palestinian state. Never. Okay? People are talking about, and it's sad because I saw last week that even here in America, we have people divided. They're just split down the middle in this country on their loyalties to what's going on in Israel. And that's so sad. I mean, if people came over here to this country and started trying to take the land away, we would unite. At least we would hope that we would. But yet when it happens to Israel, all of a sudden we want Israel to start giving away her land, which she doesn't have that much to begin with. If you take a look at the Middle East and look at what goes to the Arabs and again, you got to be very careful about Arab, because Arabs, it's not necessarily, an Arab is not really a biological link. It's more of a political affiliation in many circumstances. So there's not really a Palestinian state. The closest that there was ever anything associated with Palestine was under Rome. When they came to power, they named the land of Israel, the ancient land of Israel, they named it Palestine after the notorious enemy of the Israelites. And that Palestine comes from the word Philistine. And the Philistines, if you go to Genesis chapter 10, you'll find out that they actually came out of Egypt. Mitzrayim is the name given there, but when Greece took over, they gave new names to the areas, and Egypt was what was given to Mitzrayim. So biological Palestinians are Egyptian. They shouldn't even be in the Middle East. They should be down in the African continent. And so they're coming up here. And again, as I say about the modern day Palestinians, they actually, they're actually more politically affiliated with a certain politics or a certain government, or we're going to see later an Islamic connection to this. Okay. Now, in 70 AD, Israel was finally conquered over and beaten down, and their temple was destroyed by the Rome, and Israel was dispersed. Now, Luke 21:24 talks about how Israel will be trodden down until the times of the Gentiles would come to an end. And I'm going to revisit that verse here toward the end of this lesson as we look at the time of the Gentiles being trodden down. Now, what happened after Rome? Because Rome began to fade out, it became so big, it became so corrupt that it fizzled out eventually. It collapsed under its own corruption. Get the right word there. I'm trying to combine two words at one time. When this happened, Islam was founded in about 610 AD when Muhammad was 40 years old. And that's kind of important because you have the rise of Islam. But keep in mind that Rome was dispersed at this time, and this was around the time about also with about 10 years of Islam being founded, the Byzantine Empire came into existence, and it controlled the area. So even Muslim extremists, they can't say they had it because they were in their infancy stage by the time the Byzantines took over. Now, the Ottoman Turkish Empire, they took over control of Israel in 1517, and they kept it there until 1917 when the British Mandate controlled the area from then until 1947, and Israel became a nation in 1948. So I've covered all that. I've covered all that information to let you know that there's never been a Palestinian state. The Palestinians have never had anything to do with the land of Israel. At best, they've been nomadic tribes that have been an enemy of Israel, and that's all they ever will be. And I know it's not a popular message, and I expect to eventually get some slack over that, but so be it. This is history, and this is the Word of God. And you have to go by this. You have to go by the history and what it dictates. Now, I want to share with you something. This is, we've talked about Israel before Abraham, when it was the Garden of Eden. We've talked about the patriarchal time period. We've talked about history bringing us up to 1948. Look at this right here. Look at what we have here. Starting when Israel became a nation, there are several prophecies that are related to Israel coming back into her land. I want to read one here, Isaiah 66:8. We're going to read this verse real quick. Isaiah 66 verse 8. I don't mind referring to the scriptures, but sometimes you have to go there and read them. That way people can hear it directly for themselves. Because I just feel that sometimes you got to just get in the Bible and read it and share with people what's actually there. Isaiah 66 verse 8, it says this: Who hath heard of such a thing? Who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. What that means is this is referring to a future time when Israel will be born in one day. Born in one day, and she was. Now, what makes that so interesting is when the Babylonians conquered Israel and she was dispersed, when she began to kind of come back and had all these other occupations of, the Persians and the Grecians and the Romans, she never had her land. But when she last left her land, she was two nations, basically. She was the northern kingdom of Israel, and she was the southern kingdom of Judah. And what the Bible say? Can a nation, not split, a nation be born in one day? And I love that, because that shows that not only is God going to restore his people, but there's going to be a unity there. And ain't that going to be great when we stand before God, when we live in his presence for 1,000 years, and we're not going to be Catholics, we're not going to be Protestants, we're not going to be Baptists or Pentecostals or anything. We're going to be united in what really matters, and that's Christ. And I love that. And I think that people need to get back more to that. I think sometimes people are sold out too much to denomination. They're dedicated to that, and we really got to get away with it. It's nice to be part of a church. It's nice to have a church home, but at the same time, we have to understand that the labels don't matter. Being a Baptist isn't going to save you. Being Foursquare, which I was part of that for several years, that's not going to save you. Being a Pentecostal, I was part of that for a while. That's not going to save you. What you have to do, you have to have that personal relationship with Christ, and it's in that you have unity. Okay? But anyway, I kind of got a little evangelical there for a minute, but I wanted to share that about how God's going to restore and unite his people as one. I love that. The next one I want to look at comes from Isaiah chapter 11, verse 10. Isaiah 11:10. I think I got the right verse on this. Isaiah 11:10. Isaiah 11:10. I'm almost there. I got so many pieces of paper in my Bible. It's unreal. Okay, look at this. Isaiah 11 verse 10 says this, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse which shall stand for an ensign of the people, and it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. Now notice what it said here about there shall be a root come out of Jesse which shall stand for an ensign. It's talking about a particular ensign that's associated with the tribe of David. And there's been a symbol of Israel that's been associated with that King David, for 3,000 years. It's the Star of David. I got a Jewish flag, Israeli flag, but I can't get to it right now. If I would have thought about it, I would have brought it out. But it's the six-pointed star. This is a beautiful blue star on the white background and the two stripes on top of it. This is a prophecy. Get this. This is a prophecy that said that the Star of David would be a national symbol, and it was prophesied thousands of years ago. David was long since dead and gone at this time, and it prophesied that we would have this message, that this emblem that would come forth. Okay, great stuff. Now, this is one that I really like. This is something I want to read you this. This is what I'm very proud, very excited about. I mean, I see this, and this makes me proud to be a Christian, be a follower of God. I'm going to read to you now Jeremiah 31, verse 23. Jeremiah 31. There we go. I get so excited I forget which way I'm going in my Bible. Jeremiah 31. This is so cool. Jeremiah 31. I'm starting to get a little bit excited now, y'all. So y'all just want to bear with me for a minute. Jeremiah 31, verse 23, it says this. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, as yet they shall use this speech in the land of Judah and the cities thereof, when I shall bring again their captivity. The Lord bless thee, O habitation of justice and the mountains of holiness. Now notice what he just said there. Look at this. This is so cool. He's talking about the speech that Jeremiah was speaking hundreds of years ago. That speech, the people in the last days, they are going to speak it again. Now, let me just give you a comparison of that. Do you know that if you were just to go back to the time of the founding of America, just go back to the 1700s or even the 1400s, when Jamestown, I believe, if my history is right there, if they were connected, if we were to bring the language from now to go back then, we wouldn't be able to communicate with them because the English language has changed so much. As a matter of fact, if you take someone today with just use the basic slang, and every generation's got slang that they use. And if you're to go back to the 80s when I was a teenager, or better yet, go back to the 50s, okay? That's like 75 years ago. Go back that time period, and guess what you'd have? You'd have a different language. We can't even communicate to people in our country less than 100 years ago. But God is prophesying that hundreds, thousands of years later, that God is going to restore the Jewish language. You realize that a Jew today, if you could put him in a time capsule and send him back to the time of Jeremiah, he could actually speak the same language and they could communicate. This is another indicator to me that I really believe that God is working in the land of Israel. There's so much going on here. There's so much that we have here that we can look at, and we see that God has his hand over Israel. And even though things look bleak at times, even though they look dangerous and things look fearful, we have to understand something. God's got his hand on Israel. He has his hand on Israel, and we have to know that God is going stand up. He's going to fight for Israel. Daniel talks about that he's going to stand up in the last days, and he's going to fight, and he's going to defend Israel. And we see that, and we're going to see that in a mighty way. The Bible talks about Zechariah, and even mentions in Isaiah how Israel's going to have a fierce and a strong military force when it comes back. And we're beginning to see Israel, they're starting back and they're fighting for what's right. You know, after Hamas attacked Israel, I saw America was trying to put pressure on Israel to not defend themselves. I'm gonna be honest with you. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. If someone's attacking you, if they're killing you, if they're killing your children, and another country says, you need to let that slide. That's uncalled for, people. It really is. We don't need to be telling Israel to just sit there and just take this abuse and keep on going. We need to stand for them. And there's so much more to get into with that. And I got some other things I want to get into. I don't want to get ahead of this. Well, I'll tell you what, I want to tell you right now. I'll go ahead and jump into it. The Bible tells us that we're supposed to pray for the peace of Israel. It tells us that we're supposed to pray for the peace of Israel. It tells us that we're grafted into Israel. So to pray for Israel, to stand up for Israel, it's the same thing for praying for ourselves. Galatians chapter 3 says that God made a promise to Abraham's seed. It's not a seed as of many. It's a seed as of one. Meaning one, and that seed is Jesus Christ. And by the time you get to the end of that chapter, it says that if you were in Christ, then you are of the seed of Abraham. What does that mean? There's no difference between a biblical Jew and a biblical Christian. No difference whatsoever. They're one and the same. And I think that when people try to get Israel to divide their land, when people say that Israel needs to back down, they're not doing their job, especially if they call themselves a Christian. Well, I don't consider them a real Christian because they're not doing what God says. They're not standing up for God's people and their land. And by the way, that's where we're going to be going one day. In the millennial reign, we're going to spend a lot of time there. So people need to realize that God's people need to be prayed for. They need to be cared for. And, there's many ministries that sit there and they say you can plant trees in Israel and so forth. You can send packs to feed Jews over there. And I know many people that do. And we should do that. We should love the Jewish people. We shouldn't stand by while they do nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I hate it when I hear that Jews are being attacked because I consider them my brothers and my sisters. So